Hello, and a very warm welcome back to the Legal Cheek podcast. My name's Tom Connelly, and I'm joined by Ryan, another member of the Legal Cheek team, and one of the more recurring voices you hear on these podcasts. I have been kind of dipping in and out of them, but Julia is away this week, so we're both filling in there. The topic of this one, as you'll have seen from the title, is very much focused on exam revision and particularly the advice and tips around how to excel at what is no doubt a very stressful time. Exam season may be upon you. You may be in the thick of it listening to this. We're recording this podcast at the start of April, so it's very much gearing up towards exam season, particularly for those of you that are studying law at an undergraduate level, because I'm conscious with the SQE exams, if you're doing those, they occur throughout the year. But this advice will be applicable to both sets of scenarios. So it is totally worth listening. So, I mean, Ryan, first of all, maybe before we dive straight into the advice itself, how were exams for you? Were you quite a cool customer when it came to exams and revision? Were you probably a bit more like me, where I got worked up quite a bit and stressed about the whole process? How was it for you?
Yeah, absolutely not a cool customer by any means. I had five papers in my final year, and um, I think I had a tendency, and I'll get to this in some of the tips, to prepare some of them that I really enjoyed and then underprepare the ones I didn't enjoy. And by the time it got to revision, I realized I still had a lot of work to catch up on for some of the kind of pushed away subjects. And that kind of came back to haunt me, especially when I'm supposed to be using that time to practice past papers and look at the best sample answers possible. But I'm spending all that time rewriting notes that I should have done earlier in the year. So one of the things I definitely wish I did better was plan. Um, but yeah, actually, with that, Tom, I'll come to the first tip. So it's a very simple one. It applies to all aspects of life, but planning your time effectively is really, really important. Helps you see the bigger picture. So as I say, I sat five papers in my final year, and there was all very disparate papers. I had human rights, intellectual property law, equity and trusts, EU law, and employment, I believe was the other one. Um, it's quite difficult to balance the workload between all those papers, especially when the topics you're revising are so different, and there's a lot of reading for each of them. And as I say, I kind of fell into that trap of revising what I felt like on a day. Perhaps it was an easier topic or just something I was interested in at that moment, or I had an upcoming supervision on it. So why it matters to plan your time is that it just saves time deciding what you're going to do each day. Waking up and knowing what you're expected to do and kind of holding yourself accountable to that is really, really helpful. It also helped me with kind of avoiding procrastination. That was one big thing. I'd sit there for hours at a time thinking, okay, what am I going to do next without having any real structure in place? And it also ensures each of your modules are receiving kind of adequate coverage in preparation for the exam. So I think when making this plan, you've got to factor quite a few things in. So maybe the exam order. I had some exams in April and I had some exams in June. There's no point in me revising for the ones in June if I've got much earlier exams that I need to prepare for. So think about the sooner exams first and factor that into your revision plan. Think about which modules you are weak and strong at. Some people will be naturally very good at land law. Other people will find it their worst enemy. I really didn't like land law, so I had to put a lot more time into that one. But something like labor law, for example, I was really strong at, and I managed to do all the work on time each year. I had a lot of I'd already practiced a lot of papers. I knew I was confident in it, so I gave it a lot less time in the run up to exams. And then also make some time for other life commitments as well. So it doesn't have to be just like non-academic or professional. It can just be like social obligations. So go into kind of one of your university societies, socials, or a club or sporting events, or even carving out time for your birthday or another person's birthday, or even something more serious like an assessment center. Quite a lot of people do assessment centers in kind of the Easter time, and also VAC schemes. Julia, as we speak about, she's on a VAC scheme at the minute. So we kind of just got to factor all this into account in your plan. And um, yeah, and as I say there as well about social obligations, it's important to carve out some me time. It's really easy to overwork yourself in the lead up to your exams, and working tirelessly, like well into the night, might lead to burnout, and that's going to affect your performance, your motivation, and your focus. And especially when you've got a lot of papers spread over several many months, it's more of a marathon than a sprint, and you've got to take time to allow yourself to reset and recharge and regain motivation, and ultimately find a routine that's much more sustainable for yourself. Um, and also one thing I regret, and I don't know about you, Tom, but when now that I'm not a student anymore and I've been out of uni for a couple of years, I really regret not taking more out of the student experience, I guess, like doing more of the clubs, the societies, going to some of the networking events they offered. I kind of missed that element of university. So I think don't take that for granted. Don't know. How do you feel about that, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, just on your first 2 points, the things that jumped out for me before I go back to kind of some of my experience, but the planning your time effectively and carving out some me time are really good habits to take forward into the world of law as well. If you're a trainee or a practicing solicitor, one of the key skills that you'll need to know is how to plan your time effectively, not only from a billing perspective when you're dealing with clients, but just managing what will no doubt be an intense workload, albeit it won't be revision that you'll be doing in that scenario. It will be legal work, but just a really important habit. And if you can kind of hit the ground running with that at university in terms of your revision, I think that's a great habit to take forward. And also, just if you're planning your time effectively, you will be able to carve out some me time. I'm sure there's people listening to this podcast going, "Oh, I'm revising for undergraduate module X or I'm SQE1. How the heck am I going to find any sort of me time in my kind of my schedule?" But I think if you do plan your time effectively and start that revision process early enough, you will find that there's plenty of time to carve out stuff, whether, like you say, it's doing social activities at university, going to the gym, binge watching your favorite box set, however it is that you that helps you decompress. And as you said, Ryan, that will naturally help with exam performance because if you're going into the exams having pulled three back-to-back all-nighters, you're not going to be on top form. And if you're kind of just living off Red Bull and a sort of carving out of me time, I don't think we'll come to this as a separate point, but it sort of ties into the me time thing. But your well-being, things such as I remember when I was at university, certainly for my first year exams, I shudder to think the sort of diet that was on and caffeine intake. I think it was all kind of I think I might have predated Deliveroo when my exams were, but it was the equivalent of Deliveroo, Just Eat if they were still around. Um, yeah, so I was living off takeaways, too much caffeine, and it really does have a massive impact on your overall well-being. So really, I think revision, particularly with those 2 points in mind, starts with looking after yourself. And
Yeah.
again, these are certainly qualities that you should be trying to take on if you're wanting to pursue a career as a solicitor. So two very good points to start with, Ryan. What else have you got?
I just think, just before I move on to the next one as well, that there are some good ways of actually finding that time for yourself. And one of them is setting a clear working goal or like kind of parameters to working. So saying I'm going to work 6 hours a day or 8 hours before each lecture, whatever it may be, or that you wake up by 10 a.m. each day and stop work, having like a hard stop off of 7 p.m., no working after that. Because if you work too late into the night, ultimately it's not the same quality as it would be otherwise. As you mentioned there, going to gym, like having a routine in place. If you know you want to go to gym each morning of the week or some of the mornings of the week or having an evening dedicated to just seeing your friends, that all really factor in that me time. And also blocking out rest days. I know in the lead up to my exams I didn't really ever take a weekend off. I was working every day, and I thought I can't really afford to skip a day here, but ultimately I think if I just had a Saturday or Sunday off and came back to it on a Monday, I would have felt much better, much more focused and much more recharged. But yeah, just in terms of other revision topics too, one thing I wish I utilized more when I was at university, but I'm definitely going to utilize when I start the SQE is a knowledge tracker. So it's something quite a lot of SQE students swear by. It tracks how confident you are in different topics. So you take each of your papers and break it down into much smaller topics and rate how confident you are in each of those areas. So say contract law, for example, you can break it down into consideration, offer and acceptance, and intention to create legal relations. And then you'd rate each of those areas on how confident you are in them. So maybe you'll use like a traffic light system. So green, amber, and red. Green means very confident, don't need much work. Amber means not as confident, needs some work. And red is like priority, need to work on this now. I've seen a lot of these online and people use like Excel or Notion templates. I think a spreadsheet's really helpful for this. You can actually go online. So if you're considering for the SQE, you can actually go online and see the course specification and see exactly what will be examined. Um, and it breaks it down really like piecemeal for you. So you can use each of those headings from the like the specification of examinable content as the headings, and then just maybe do some single best answer questions in each of those areas just to assess how confident you feel in them. And then you can use that as kind of green, red, or amber based on how confident you feel there. It's good to update once you've updated knowledge tracker, once you've obviously improved your knowledge there and you know where to you've got to work on a little bit. And I think some of the benefits are that when you are doing this plan that we talk about at the beginning, planning your revision, you can allocate much more time to those areas you've identified you are much weaker in. Also, it stops passive revision as well. So you won't be revising those areas that you already know you're strong and confident at just for the sake of revising it. You can just kind of skip that for now. Um, and yeah, as I say, quite a lot of SQE people I know have sworn by it as a very effective method for preparing for their exams. And then there's also just talking about what study methods work for you. Everyone learns very differently, and there's no one size fits all method, but there are some kind of scientifically backed methods that are shown to work. One of which is spaced repetition, so either using flashcards or using software like Anki. I really like using Anki because I think physical flashcards can get easily lost, or you can just get marks all over them and they'll get ruined. And Anki's really helpful because you'll get a question on the screen, you look at the answer, and then you can rate how easy you found it. So either easy, difficult, or very difficult. And Anki will keep asking you those same questions. If you found it easy, it won't come back for it for a while because you already know it. If you find it very hard, it will come back to it immediately and keep on testing you on it. And it kind of drills into your brain, kind of um, the answers to these questions that you forgot before. And I found it very helpful for just kind of remembering key rules of law and then also key exceptions. Another way of studying is through flowcharts and diagrams. So quite a lot of my notes at undergraduate were just big blocks of black text with kind of nothing interesting there to remember, no color, no diagrams, no nothing. But I think, especially in a closed book exam, if you have a diagram to remember that you've included in your notes, then it's much easier to kind of visualize that diagram than it is to visualize kind of the entirety of your just plain black text notes. And it will also just help you recall that kind of area of law in more detail. If you can associate that diagram with that area, it'll be much easier to recall the actual laws there. Tom, was there anything you used when you was at university for studying?
Yeah, I'm just looking. I must confess, when you mentioned knowledge tracker, it wasn't a phrase that I certainly had come across during my
Mm,
my revision days. I know a lot of the particularly with the SQE prep providers, and as you mentioned, a lot of them are now adopting AI and other technology to track the progress and learning of their students. And similar to a knowledge tracker, they can identify kind of the weaker areas
yeah,
in which you need to focus. I think I would have really liked that as an undergraduate, or particularly when I was studying the bar course. But alas, it just the technology wasn't around back in my day. I'm making it sound like I'm in my 50s, but I'm not. I'm not that old. But certainly nothing like this existed. In terms of the study methods, I was very much in the flow charts and diagrams camp. It was just how I was able to retain knowledge. I kind of studied alongside people that would use the flashcard method, or some would just literally read reams of text and just sort of have photographic memories, which I was always very envious of, particularly when I did the bar course, which for those of you listening that are doing that or are planning to do it, it can be, particularly with the civil and criminal litigation, it is very heavy rule based. And flowcharts just lent itself to that. So if scenario A happened, what happens to B and C, and you can kind of work logically. I think that's just how my brain was tuned into it. But I would probably say, just again touching on a wider point, probably finding a method that works for you and don't worry too much about what other people doing. I think there's a tendency sometimes, particularly in the build up to exams, to kind of compare yourself to others. I remember this isn't certainly not this. I'll disclaimer this. This certainly isn't advice, but in terms of remember revising for some of my bar course, and there was almost like the phrase. It was sort of like exam roulette and topic roulette. You would like you're going to potentially six topics would come up, but you probably revise four and hope for the best. And I know people that adopted that approach, and it worked for them fine. But I was very much of that panic if a topic didn't come up, and obviously that would you'd certainly be screwed over if it didn't. But don't stay in your own lane to a certain extent and focus on yourself. Don't compare yourself too much. Don't worry about if you feel people are in the library or wherever it might be for longer than you. I think just very much do you and what think of the approaches that work best for you, and I don't think you'll go too far wrong. Um, so so that's covered 4 points so far, Ryan. Is there any more advice that you have for students listening?
Yeah, it actually relates to something you just said there about topic roulette. So I think it's about knowing what the exam actually requires of you, because different papers will have different formats. So my university exams were always composed of either essay questions or problem questions, like a problem scenario. And the kind of you had to do 4 questions on each paper, but some papers required you to do maybe 3 problem questions and 1 essay question, or 3 essay questions and 1 problem question. Wherever I had the discretion to choose between them, I would always prefer the problem questions. I was just much better at them naturally, and I didn't really know how to answer an essay question that well. But in doing so, I kind of thwarted myself a little bit when I come to a paper and find out, oh, I have to do at least 2 essay questions here instead of I can't do 3 problem questions. So I wish I prepared more in that regard. And if I knew in advance kind of what was expected of me, I would have been able to prepare much, much better. And you said there about topic roulette. I think there was a lot of people who I knew who strategically dropped topics. And I don't think it's necessarily something I'd advocate for everyone because it can be quite risky. But some exams do give you a choice of questions. So we had maybe 12 questions on the paper and we only had to answer 4 of them and we could kind of choose. And the 4 questions, each of the 12 questions can be on isolated or distinct topics. So some people would just drop whole topics and they probably wouldn't want to answer a question on, or that they found too difficult, or just came up completely in isolation and there was no point revising it. And that freed up time for them to revise other areas. And ultimately, I think it's something I wish I adopted because, like you, Tom, I was kind of worried about anything and everything coming up. And maybe the question that maybe I dropped a topic, but the topics I did revise for was actually a super, super hard question that year, and I didn't know how to approach it. So I was stretching myself very thin trying to revise everything, but it was to kind of a time cost burden there as well. For the SQE, I wouldn't say you can really drop many topics because anything on the syllabus can be assessed and you don't have a choice in the questions you answer. It's just simply the same questions for everyone. But as I said before, the knowledge tracker can really help you see where you are weakest at and where you might need to do more single best answer questions. And then just in that regard as well, just getting familiarized with the format of the papers. Another revision tip would be to practice as many past papers as you can get your hands on. Um, I think timing and exam technique is key to exam success. So it's one thing to be able to answer questions in your own time, sat in your room in silence. It's another to be able to do them to a high quality level under timed conditions and under the pressure of an exam. And the benefits of the practicing as many past papers as you can is that you get used to time constraints, you refine your exam technique, helps you identify any gaps in your knowledge early enough to be able to fix them. And it will also help you identify kind of any repeat patterns in the questions from year to year. So some years you'll see that a question crops up really regularly on consideration in contract law. So you might be able to prepare for that much more because you know it's going to come up next year, or that something only comes up once in a blue moon every 10 years. So there's maybe no point in actually practicing for that one. Um, you might also be able to find sample answers that show what a high scoring response would look like. So we had a kind of a student run legal journal called Parent Curium, and it would publish anyone who got like a high first or a double first in a past paper. And it did basically just ask for people's permission to include them in there. And if you read through that, you could get some almost perfect sample answers for you to kind of get some inspiration from and apply to yourself. And then finally, I'd say to get tip top marks, and there's a couple of people I knew who got double first, which is a very, very high score. I most definitely did not. What they said to me was that they often read the mark scheme. So, I mean, you could be missing very, very simple marks. You might be have a poor structure to your answer, or overlooking a very key point that you think is so obvious it's not worth stating, or lacking some depth of analysis. And you could just pick up those simple marks by checking the mark scheme and see what they're actually examining for. But Also, you could be add some depth to your answer that you didn't know was necessary by looking at the mark scheme and seeing exactly what the examiners would consider perfect and reward marks for. And ultimately, the small marks you could make up by looking at the mark scheme could mean the difference between a 2-2 or a 2-1, a 2-1 and the first and a double first, etc., whatever you're aiming for. So I think it's very important to do the past papers, look at the mark scheme, and be familiar with the kind of the format that you'll be assessed on. Tom, do you have anything else in that regard?
No, I think I'm just having kind of flashbacks to my days of revision and all-nighters in the library. It's not a particularly pleasant
A fun
experience.
time.
No,
Yeah.
no, no, not at all. Obviously, it's been a few years now, but no, that I think Ryan, that's all really really good advice. So I guess maybe just some concluding words of wisdom for the students that are about to embark on their exams, potentially for the first time. What leave them with some parting words of wisdom, Ryan?
I think, yeah, the highest scoring students tend to do the basics really, really well. They plan ahead and they practice, practice, practice. But however you choose to study, I think you said this earlier, Tom, kind of don't compare yourself to others. Comparison is the thief of joy. And it's also
Well
important to
put.
carve out some time for yourself. I do like that old
Yeah.
adage. And it's important to carve out some time for yourself as well. Like someone could be working in the library until 3 o'clock in the morning, you see them there and think quite bad about yourself. But there's nothing to say that the work that person's doing is quality. And some people can just function on less sleep and work in the night rather than in a daytime. Everyone's different. You don't know what they've got going on either. So kind of just keep your head down, take a step back, recalibrate, recharge, give yourself a day off before the exams roll around. And if you're in the middle of exam season or you're just about to start, best of luck from everyone at Legal Team, not just me and Tom. Anything else to add, Tom?
No, I think that covers it all. So yeah, I just pass on my good luck to all of those of you listening that have got exams coming up. Thank you very much for tuning in and listening to this. You can find all our podcasts on iTunes and well, it's Apple Podcasts now, I believe, and
Yeah.
Spotify. So you feel free to go through the back catalogue. There's some great stuff in there. And yeah, we'll have you hopefully join us at another Legal Cheat podcast in the very near future. Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.